world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, December 5th, as you are listening to this. And of course, we've got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about, especially with this regime. Now, this administration is doing a lot of things, and there's a lot of things that should be called out. Congress should be doing a lot more. Now, today, Congress was back in session, and I was hoping there would be a bigger push against the thing that this administration did, but I am not surprised that Congress limps in and does really nothing. And they didn't really act against Donald Trump or anything. They haven't gotten to that point yet. They haven't decided that things are bad enough that they need to make a move. Now, I think they ultimately will, but by the time the Republicans realize they're losing this fight, that they need to do something, and that siding with Donald Trump is the wrong move, it is going to be too little too late. It probably is already well past that point, to be honest. The people that support Donald Trump and have allowed him to do the things that he has done should eventually be held accountable for the things that they have allowed him to do as well. Now, remember what happened in 1940s after they toppled Germany. There were the Nuremberg trials. The people were put online or on trial for the things that they had done while following orders under the Nazi regime. And I think ultimately there are going to be people held accountable down the line for all of the things that they are allowing Donald Trump to do. Donald Trump is right now operating unchecked. He's doing whatever he wants, and he doesn't care. You know, he goes into Venezuela and kidnaps effectively the president of Venezuela. Now, there is some question as to whether or not he was the legitimate winner of that election. But see, what Donald Trump fails to realize is he wanted to topple the regime, except what did he accomplish? Nothing. All of the cabinet members are still there. It's the VP, is it Delcy Rodriguez, I think is her name, is now the acting or the actual president of Venezuela. He claims that we are going to be running Venezuela going forward, but yet he didn't change anything about the people in charge. It is the same exact people doing the same exact things. This is how Donald Trump fucks up all the time. He's unserious. He doesn't do things in a way that warrants any sort of credibility, right? He says he's gonna put in somebody else, but he doesn't. He just lets the VP take over, and he claims absolute victory, and acts like we did such a good job getting Maduro. Now, here's the thing. He wants to say, well, Maduro had warrants out from before, and I don't remember what time frame those warrants were actually issued. But if we're just going to now start doing military operations to go in and go after people who have charges in other jurisdictions, why haven't we gone after Netanyahu, who has charges in the International Criminal Court? Oh, wait, we don't recognize the International Criminal Court. And all this would take would be for some foreign power to put charges against Donald Trump, and suddenly do we have to worry about them sending someone in and removing Donald Trump to face charges in their country? Now, he thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he can do whatever he wants, and that he is going to get away with it because places like Congress have always stood with him. Now, we're going to get back to Venezuela in a bit, but I wanted to start out with a story out of Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz announced today that he is not seeking reelection. He is ending his campaign to run for a third term as governor of Minnesota. Now, is this going to be the end of Tim Walz's political career? I don't know. He could potentially end up doing something else, but why is he stepping down? Well, there has been reports that his family, including his daughter, are getting very serious threats against them. And you can guess about what side of the political aisle those threats are coming from because, newsflash, it's almost always the right, despite them trying to miscategorize anything like that that happens as coming from the left. So his family's getting death threats and other threats. So he decides he is going to drop out of the race. And that's not the only issue. Now we have this Somali scandal that really isn't a scandal. This is something that has been investigated for years in Minnesota, and it's blown way out of proportion, and most of it's made up by a right wing podcaster who thinks he's some breaking journalist and has some inside scoop, and he doesn't. And I don't consider myself, a journalist. I'm more of a commentator. But anyway, he comes out and he says things like, "Hey, I'm going to do I'm looking at these Somali run daycare centers. There's no kids here. It's all a fraud." And he starts showing up with signs and things like that saying, "Show me the kids," showing up in hours when they're not open or before they open. Um, and I'd be more worried if the daycare centers who are watching children would allow just some random person to show up with no credentials and start making demands of, "I want to see the children," if they were actually allowed to see the children. We should be more worried about that. But this whole scandal is now erupting again. It's not even really a scandal. It is just the right going forward and pushing false narratives because it's all they have. They never have an original idea. They can't come up with, they couldn't find anything on Tim Walz, so they had to make up a story about things that didn't really happen. And of course, they accuse the left of doing the same thing, except we can provide facts, and they go, "Well, you guys need all sorts of facts to prove everything you say. You don't believe anybody else." Well, no, we don't believe you without facts. We're not the right. You guys will believe anything, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, if it comes from the right talking head. Hannity could come out tomorrow and say that there is evidence that Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris are all actually shape-shifting lizard people from Jupiter, and suddenly that would be the newest thing. Oh, well, look what they're keeping from us. They get their talking points from right-wing media, and then they just run with it. And you always have to wait for a story to develop because you see, it breaks and it takes a little bit. And then suddenly they get their talking point and they all say the same thing, almost word for word identical. They parrot each other. This is ridiculous with how MAGA acts. So now Tim Walz is not running for governor for a third term in Minnesota. Okay. What's he going to do next? We don't know. He says right now he's going to focus on serving the people of Minnesota and finishing his term, which is commendable. That is what he was elected to do. Now, who could run to fill that void? Don't know yet. They're going to have to come up with somebody. And right now, the front runner appears to be Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is very popular in the state of Minnesota, has won statewide, and could potentially carry and win the governor's race. Now, I'm seeing some left-leaning and even some right-leaning creators saying, well, running Amy Klobuchar could be just like running Kamala Harris, and I don't think so. First of all, Amy Klobuchar is not connected to Tim Walz at all. Just because she's a woman does not automatically make the same comparison. And there's a lot of difference and a lot of nuance between the two situations. Now, the right-leaning people don't look at nuance or anything. And then you got the people on the left. Well, they want to hold certain people on the far left. These are the very far leftists that I'm talking about, the ones that are on the very, very far left. They want to hold their breath and stomp their feet till they get their perfect candidate. And while Amy Klobuchar may not be the best candidate for Minnesota, I don't know. I don't know Minnesota politics. Okay. I focus primarily here in Iowa and on the national stage. But I think she could make potentially a really good governor. Now, I think if she runs, probably because she's already run statewide, has a good chance of getting the Democratic nomination, and then could end up winning the primary as what if there even is one. I mean, there will be a primary vote, but I don't know how many primary challengers there would be if she enters the race. Now, the other difference between uh, her running and what happened with Kamala Harris when Joe Biden stepped out is the time frame. We're dealing with January going into an election year, whereas Kamala Harris had to step in basically in July. She had 104 days till election, whereas we have uh, Amy Klobuchar potentially being the replacement for Tim Walz, having 10 months roughly. Big difference. A lot of difference here when it comes to politics. They're not the same thing. Don't just go all hope is lost. And besides the fact that you have Minnesota that has been reliably red for like 4 or 5 decades, they were like the only state to not vote for Reagan the second time. So, um, with that being said, this is entirely possible that Amy Klobuchar ends up with the nomination and probably the next governor of Minnesota if she enters the race. Now we don't know who's all going to enter yet. We'll have to see. Now beyond that, I don't think this is a direct result of Tim Walz running for vice president with Kamala Harris. Now I haven't seen really many people making that connection yet, and I'm kind of surprised. I've seen people talking about Kamala Harris running for, after Joe Biden and trying to say make connections there with Amy Klobuchar. But I haven't seen really anybody saying that it's because he ran for VP. In all honesty, they made a great run, and the VP typically does not add a lot to the ticket. Sometimes it adds some stability, like what Joe Biden brought to Barack Obama, because Barack Obama was relatively new into politics. You adding Joe Biden into the mix with somebody who had um, political experience up on Capitol Hill, had friendships they could work to get things accomplished. But I don't know that it actually pushed Obama over the edge. Same thing if you look at Hillary Clinton picking Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine didn't factor in. It was the simple fact that Hillary was unlikable and probably unelectable that did her in. If the Democrats had ran literally anybody else but the uh, sworn nemesis of the Republican Party, their boogeyman, we may not even be having this conversation about what is going on with Donald Trump today. We would have been in a very different situation. So we're going to be watching what happens out of Minnesota, hoping that Tim Walz has a good future ahead of him. Now, some people are suggesting that Tim Walz could potentially get appointed as the next senator from Minnesota. Now, how would that work? Well, if Amy Klobuchar does run for governor, she would not have to resign until after she wins the governor race. Minnesota is not one of the states that requires you to resign your current position to campaign. So she could end up running for the governor race, and if she wins, which I think she would, her seat would then be vacant after that, and she would be the one who gets to turn around and decide who fills that seat. So the theory is that she potentially could appoint Tim Walz as senator. Interesting theory. I don't know if it would happen. We will have to see if any of that plays out. We don't even know for sure that Amy Klobuchar is going to run for governor. But I'm not worried that a Democrat is going to win Minnesota. I think that's a foregone conclusion, in part because the main competition that I've seen so far coming out of Minnesota is Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, who's about as dumb as a box of rocks, put all of his money backing Donald Trump, refuses to walk away from backing Donald Trump and continues to do so, even though it has basically bankrupted his company and took what was a fairly successful man and has made him almost broke. I don't think he is a very serious competitor, but this is who the Republican Party has left. They're not attracting the best and the brightest anymore. All right, now I want to talk about Venezuela in a little bit, but I do have some other things I want to talk about. Specifically, I want to talk about Senator Mark Kelly. Now, you may remember a while back that um, Mark Kelly and other members of Congress who all have military and or intelligence backgrounds came out with an ad that basically was aimed at reminding members of the military to uphold their oath, that they do not have to follow unlawful orders. Well, Donald Trump has been trying to go after Mark Kelly for months about this now. That he got embarrassed, he got hurt. They want retribution, but they can't leave it alone. They can't walk away from something like that. So what do? They turn around and they were talking about bringing him back to active service. Now, Mark Kelly was a 25-year veteran. He had retired from the military. Now he gets retirement benefits, etc., as a retiree. And what are they going to do? Well, it sounds like they are going to give him a retirement demotion, which is going to affect his benefits and his pension. Now, Mark Kelly has an option to appeal, and I don't know what that entire appeal process is going to look like. One of the reasons they decided not to go with the court martial is because the people who would be deciding that court martial would be other active duty service members and longtime service members who would probably side with Mark Kelly, and they didn't want to be embarrassed. So they go this route, which is probably also going to embarrass um, this administration. They couldn't just drop it. Nobody had been talking about Mark Kelly or those videos. There were so many other things going on in the news. They could have ignored it and said, "Okay, we're just going to move past it and forget about it." But they had to go back. They had to get their pound of flesh. They had to embarrass him, and ultimately, they are going to end up embarrassing themselves even worse. Okay. Um, Now with this Venezuela thing, and I'm going to be talking intensively about Venezuela in a little bit, but I think it's all a big distraction, in part because of the Epstein files. Now, more and more stuff is supposed to be coming out about the Epstein files, and they're dragging their feet. There are deadlines in place that were already missed. I think December 19th was the deadline to have everything released, and I believe today was the deadline for the DOJ to have documents to Congress in order to tell them what they redacted and why. You know, if they redacted people's names, why did they redact names? Was it descriptions of events because they were too graphic? Was it to protect victims' identities? Who did they redact? What did they redact and why? That was all spelled out in the law, and they haven't done any of that. And if you've seen any of what has come out so far, um, these Epstein files have been very heavily redacted. They have been to the point where it is, in some cases, just ridiculous, where you have thousands and thousands of images and pages, and they end up having nothing viewable on any of it. So I think the whole operation with Venezuela was in part a um, excuse to distract away from the Epstein files, and it kind of worked for a couple of days. But it's not going to work long term as we get back into things going on. They are going to end up uh, releasing more and more information, and Donald Trump, of course, is not going to be able to go ahead and keep us distracted from it. Now, when it comes to the Epstein files, there was some information that came out. Donald Trump wants us to believe that he never went to Epstein Island. He never hung out with Epstein, didn't know Epstein. They didn't know each other. And anything suggesting they knew each other is a Democratic hoax. And he doesn't want us to think about the fact that there were things going on about any of it, right? That he was connected at all. Well, part of the flight logs were released, and it shows Donald Trump took at least 8 flights with Jeffrey Epstein. And this is coming from a DOJ email from 2020 that was talking about things in the Epstein files, and it mentions Donald Trump saying that there was at least evidence saying he was on the plane at least 8 times. Now, this seems very credible. And it was one of the things that was not redacted or were not redacted very well. Donald Trump being on the flight logs, one, does not mean he did anything wrong. It does not automatically mean that Donald Trump did anything with any of the victims. However, it shines a big glaring light on the story Donald Trump likes to tell, and that being that, he didn't know Epstein, that they weren't friends, they didn't do anything, they didn't talk to each other, they didn't, he didn't have anything to do with him. Well, how is it possible that he was on Epstein's plane 8 different times and never knew the guy? Seems a little weird. How is it possible that some of those flights included Ghislaine Maxwell, someone Donald Trump claims to have never known? Again, seems weird. I believe that everything going on with Venezuela and everything else that this administration is doing is another effort to distract and divert away from these files and trying to get people not talking about all of the negative involving Donald Trump. And Donald Trump doesn't want us to know that he is deeply involved with Epstein, but he said varying things before. He's talked about Epstein and the things going on. He goes, well, it was a different time in Palm Beach in the 90s. A different time. I grew up in the 90s. At what point in time was it ever okay or justifiable for adult men? And I'm not taught when I say adult men, I am talking the clearly adult men. We're not talking about an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old. Where was it ever okay for adult men to be doing inappropriate things with children? Again, not talking about that gray area of 18, 17. No, we're talking about Donald Trump was in his 40s in the 90s, and we're talking about girls that were under 18. When was that ever okay? Now, this is assuming Donald Trump had something to do in the Epstein files, but we know he did. We know at least that he did things that were inappropriate with children. And this is from his own admission. He's talked about when he owned Miss Teen USA, that he could walk in on the girls 14, 15, 16, 17 changing as part of Miss Teen USA, and he got away with it. He said, well, there's areas there are no men allowed, but I can walk in because I own the pageant. What are they going to do? They just let you do that kind of stuff when you own the pageant. At what point is that okay? They did, because a lot of the parents and stuff never said anything at the time. Because what are they going to do? Say something and have Donald Trump eliminate their child from the competition and lose? That's why people like him always got away with things like this. He doesn't want us to know that he is so deeply connected to Epstein. It's not funny. And I've said before, I think Epstein is going to be the vehicle that potentially moves the Republicans away from Donald Trump. If it's not Epstein, it is going to be Venezuela and his actions surrounding other things involving Venezuela. And what is that going to look like? Well, when they decide to move on Donald Trump, as long as they still are in Congress or still have control of both chambers of Congress, I think the Republicans are, if they move on him, they are going to hold an impeachment inquiry. It is going to be quick. They are going to have when they do it, they are going to know ahead of time that they have the votes to pass the articles. They may have to use a discharge petition to get around that slimy worm Mike Johnson, and then they are going to turn around and if they will not pass it in the House, I firmly believe, as long as Republicans are in charge, unless they know they have the votes in the Senate to remove Donald Trump. I say that almost every time I bring this up, but I think that's what's going to happen here. That they are going to make that move and Donald Trump would be gone. Now, he would burn the Republican Party down in the process. He would release anything and everything he could. But the thing is, when he is gone, expect the Republican Party to burn him as well. If they move from Donald Trump using either Venezuela or the Epstein files, expect them to release everything they have on Trump, whether that is anything connecting him in the Epstein files, anything else. Once they have removed him from the party, any sort of loyalty to Trump is going to be viewed as bad, and they are going to be worried about getting reelected. And I think that you're probably going to see that move happen coming up soon because primaries are starting and we are gearing up toward the election. And I think they are potentially going to be doing this ahead of the 2024 or 2026 midterms, um, trying to make it so that they can retain power. Now, I don't think it's going to work to save them the House or the Senate. Um, I think it's that the House is almost a foregone conclusion, and it's possible that they lose the Senate. Okay, now we've been talking about Venezuela, and now that we're talking about Congress, and I mentioned spineless Mike Johnson. He comes out and he says, well, this wasn't an act that required Congress's approval, just Congress's notification. The president has control of the military, and he doesn't need Congress's approval to do something like this. Oh, really? If this had been a Democrat, Republicans would have been screaming for impeachment and everything else in the process. You have the president without the authority or the support of Congress or even notifying Congress. They went in and took out the leadership of a foreign country, captured the president and his wife, and bring them back to New York City to stand trial on some trumped up gun charges. And I don't know where those gun charges come from because, well, uh, they uh, if they was for owning machine guns and other things like that, well, how does that work when he wasn't on U.S. soil? How are we able to hold foreign nationals accountable for things in their own country? Now, unless they have some sort of documentation that Maduro had somebody buy them on his behalf in the United States, but that's probably going to be very, very weak and very, very shaky at best. This is what this administration does. It fucks up at every turn when it comes to indicting people and things like that. This is what happens when you let the least qualified people run the country. Now, talking about Maduro being in the United States, he is in the United States, he's in U.S. custody, and they are in the Southern District of New York. Now, apparently, there are courts specific in New York and some other places that handle things like this, where you are dealing with foreign nationals and foreign dignitaries and things, where they handle challenges about in court cases like this. So that's where this is being held. And Maduro has pled not guilty to all charges. And he was arraigned, and he was also advised in court of his rights. And he was advised that he has the right to remain silent. He's got the right to an attorney, all of those things, and he is going to get the same treatment as anybody else. Now, I haven't seen anything from people on the right screaming and hollering about that. They're not saying he doesn't deserve due process, or where was his due process when he sent the drugs and stuff. Funny thing about that, they don't mention drug running in any of the charges. They're not talking about charges for fentanyl, for heroin, or anything like that. They don't mention any drug charges at all. Yet that was one of the things that this administration used as their justification for getting him, was that he was responsible for bringing in uh, fentanyl into this country. But they don't charge him with that. That's weird. That's suspicious. And then beyond that, they amend their indictment and talk about one of the cartels, and they actually said that that cartel doesn't exist. One of the cartels that they were using as their justification to go get him and do all this doesn't actually exist. And this is where Donald Trump and this administration fuck up. And this is where Donald Trump has repeatedly fucked up going all the way back into 2020. They do these things, and they can say anything out in public as a campaign speech or in public statements or whatever. But when they get inside a court of law, their attorneys are having to say specific things. Look at what happened to Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani was speaking as Donald Trump's personal attorney, going into all of these election cases involving the 2020 general election. And he was out in public saying, there's all kinds of proof. We're alleging fraud. We're alleging cheating. We're alleging this and this and this and this and this. And then they go into court. And in one of the cases where they filed one of the lawsuits it was filed for fraud, and they held a press conference right before it talking about fraud. And what does Rudy Giuliani say? Yeah, we're not alleging there's any proof of fraud. He says it in court. Why? Because they're worried about getting contempt charges. They're worried about getting disbarred. Because the thing is, you can say anything out in public, but inside a courtroom, things are different. So Maduro has been arraigned. I don't know how this court case is going to play out. And what happens if he is found not guilty? Does this administration just keep him locked up anyway? The whole situation is weird. It was half thought out by Donald Trump, and we are hearing that part of the reason he went after Maduro, I think I talked about it on yesterday's podcast, was that after sending the fleet, after sending the blockade and all of this down there and tried to intimidate Maduro, Maduro was seen dancing out in public, dancing. And Donald Trump took that as a personal slap in the face and as an insult and saying, well, I don't recognize your authority. You're just a weak, puny little person, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what happened here. Donald Trump decides that Maduro mocked him or insulted him, so he goes after him. And what was one of the things we heard about people on the right when it came to Kamala Harris or it came to Hillary Clinton? It was consistently, they're going to be too emotional, they're going to act on emotion, and they're going to bring us into a war, they're going to do this, all because their feelings got hurt. Well, here we are. Now, I've talked about how Donald Trump initiated a regime change, or he's calling it a regime change. And it's not because Delcy Rodriguez, who was the VP, has now been sworn in as president of Venezuela. And Delcy Rodriguez has come out and basically said they are putting the full weight of the government against anybody who helped Donald Trump and this administration come in and get Maduro. Oh, really? Yeah, they're going to be going after people who helped Donald Trump and this administration get Maduro. So that means they're looking at criminal charges for sympathizers within their own country, and if there are any American agents in the country, they could be facing criminal charges, etc. That does not sound like a regime change in doing something that is favorable for the United States. This is just bizarre. Now, if they really wanted to change the regime, they would have put in Machado. I think it's Mary Machado, but that doesn't sound right. I can't remember her first name. I apologize. But Machado, who had won the Nobel Peace Prize, she was the opposition leader. And why didn't they go with Machado? Well, it's because she won the Nobel Peace Prize and Donald Trump didn't. Pretty much point blank. The Washington Post, a very conservative publication, has come out with that as their justification. They are saying that it is because she did not give up the Nobel Peace Prize and say, well, no, I'm not going to accept it. Give it to Donald Trump instead. He deserves it more. That is why Donald Trump went with Delcy Rodriguez, the VP, and put them in charge of Venezuela. Isn't that typical from Donald Trump? He didn't get his flashy Peace Prize. He didn't get the trophy he wanted. So he's going to go ahead and not support the person who he probably should have. He didn't change anything in Venezuela by doing all of this. All he has done is captured Maduro and violated several international treaties, several international laws, broken multiple U.S. laws, and opened his administration up to any sort of problems coming from it. Now, he has said he doesn't need or didn't want congressional approval, doesn't need it for this kind of action. But yes, he does. Going in, using the military to go in and remove the leader of a country is an act of war. At least you would think so. that should be and that would be require Congress to give him some kind of a war powers resolution. And in fact, the Senate is going to be voting sometime this week on a war powers resolution limiting Donald Trump and using more military force. Now, I don't know if that's going to actually pass the Senate. If public opinion continues to stay against Donald Trump, it may have a similar effect to what happened with the Epstein files, where congressional Republicans are worried about getting elected, et cetera, and that they may end up turning on Donald Trump. But he didn't think that he needed to tell Congress. And one of the other things is he said, well, telling them it could have been treasonous because they could have leaked everything and ruined my perfect plan. What? If it was so perfect and you were all in the right, the only reason they would have leaked it is if you were in the wrong. Could that have been why you didn't tell them? Well, no, because Donald Trump wouldn't admit that because he never admits that he's wrong. So he goes ahead, doesn't tell Congress. But now we're finding out that he told the oil companies before, during, and after. He was talking to them the whole time. The whole time he was discussing this with the oil companies. So this wasn't even about a regime change. This was about oil. And they're talking that one of the things he's saying, well, we're going to get back the oil they stole from us. How did Venezuela steal oil from the United States? They produce oil, and they are not entitled or they are not required to sell it to the United States always. They can sell it wherever they want. But Donald Trump wants to send in the oil companies, which I believe he had previously told to vacate Venezuela to punish Maduro. Now he wants to send them back in to build a whole bunch of infrastructure to get them on board so that they get crude oil pumping out of Venezuela and that it's going to help America. This is completely ridiculous. This is the kind of double talk that happens when you have a dementia patient running things. Donald Trump is completely and totally unhinged. He has lost the plot. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's saying. Now, Trump has been talking about, and he was talking to reporters yesterday, about what's next. And that and he mentioned, just like Marco Rubio, he mentioned Cuba. But he also talked about Greenland and Colombia. Now, why Colombia? I have no idea. Now, Colombia, though, from what I understand, they do have a bigger role to play in the drug smuggling and the cartels and things like that. If his justification was legitimate, that would actually make some sense. I'm not saying he's correct in what he has done because he didn't do that. He's not correct in how he went about doing things, but that if that is his justification is legitimately drugs, Colombia makes more sense. But then he was also talking about Greenland, and he mentioned Greenland again. And he's been wanting Greenland for a long time, in part because it would be the biggest land acquisition probably since the purchase of Alaska. And he thinks it would be this great thing. Now, most of Greenland is uninhabited. I think there's only, I'm not even sure how many people on Greenland. I don't want to guess. I know I'd be wrong. But it is not, for it being such a huge area, it is not very densely populated. But he keeps saying we need it for national defense and to guard against Russia and China. But do we really? I don't think we do. In part because Greenland is part of Denmark, and Denmark is a NATO country. So we could work out an agreement to put a base, and I think we even have a military station on Greenland, and that would serve the same purpose. But see, Donald Trump doesn't want that. He wants the acquisition, and he wants to, again, he's worried about his legacy. And I think that's part of why he's ramping some of this stuff up. I think he is getting very, very worried about his health. But going back to Greenland, he's been focused on Greenland. He mentioned Cuba. And if they go after Cuba, again, I don't know what the end goal is with Cuba. I don't know what Cuba has that we want, why he would want to do that, other than it's another dictator-controlled country that he thinks he could justify uh, to change. Now, we've tried to do that in the past, and it has failed almost every time. We've never been able to successfully change Cuba, and I don't know that we have any reason to do that um, at all. But Donald Trump is going to do what he wants to do. Now, as far as going into and trying to acquire Greenland by force, Denmark has come out and said that they would invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter if he does this. Article 5 is the part of the NATO Charter that says an attack against one is an attack against all. And it invokes the Mutual Defense Clause, which would mean the rest of NATO would go against the United States. Now, that could successfully crumble NATO because we're the backbone of NATO. We are one of the largest military supporters. We have the most money involved in our own defense. But if NATO gets summoned in against us, that could lead to a global conflict. And Donald Trump, of course, being the man of peace that he claims to be, I don't know why he would want to do this. But see, he only wants that flashy peace prize because it's flashy and other people have it, and he is jealous of them. He is not actually, truthfully, a peaceful person. If he was, he wouldn't be doing things like this. The idea of NATO going in and having to defend Greenland from a fellow NATO country, you would think would be something we would never have to discuss. We haven't had to discuss it since World War II, where the idea of NATO came about. It started as an answer to Soviet Russia, and that we were going to defend against the threat of the USSR, and we were going to go ahead and do all of these things. Okay? We were going to defend them if they continued to aggress past the line we agreed to at the end of World War II. Well, when the Soviet Union broke up, a lot of those countries ended up joining NATO and they wanted protection from Russia because they didn't want to go back under Russian or Soviet control. And one of the reasons they were so well defended was because of the United States. Now, Donald Trump is trying to justify everything he has done in Venezuela and what he is looking at doing in Greenland, etc., with the Monroe Doctrine. And of course, it doesn't mean anything close to what he says it does. He says it means that he gets to do whatever he wants, and the Western or the Eastern Hemisphere, which would be Europe, Asia, etc., cannot tell us what to do. And that's not what it means. Monroe Doctrine basically was set up where we told Europe, quit colonizing the Americas, let the Americas do what they're going to do on their own. You worry about your half, we'll worry about our half of the world, and we'll leave each other alone. Now, that hasn't really been US policy in a long time. In fact, we entered 2 world wars where we interfered in foreign policy on the eastern side of the world. And what we view as the eastern side of the world is based on the international dateline and the prime meridian, etc. And yeah, you guys know how that works. But that's the reason it's east versus west. But anyway, we let them do their thing, except we didn't. We've been involved for a long time. So what he wants to do is say, well, we can be involved over in your shit, but leave us alone. That's not how that works. And of course, Donald Trump is trying to recoin it as the Donroe Doctrine, which is dumb as fuck. And it sounds like something a third grader would come up with, and I'm probably insulting third graders. In part because we call it the Monroe Doctrine, because the man's name was Monroe. It wasn't some fancy thing where, they came up with it later on and called it that. No, it was literally his name. Now, Donald Trump doesn't care about world politics. He only cares about looking like the tough guy and doing all of this. He is trying to do a bunch of things. And I think part of the reason he is doing everything with Venezuela, he's back to talking about Greenland. Now maybe he's talking about Colombia, Cuba, maybe even Mexico and Canada, and he's doing all of this. I think our speculation about his health is correct. Okay. He's not well. And you can tell by the things he says and the things he does that something is happening with him. He's not in good health. He comes out and says he is taking 4 times the recommended dose of low dose aspirin. Uh, and this is the type of stuff that they would give you if you're actively having a heart attack. If they're worried about making sure you have thin blood to prevent a heart attack, they put you on low dose aspirin, 81 milligrams. He's taken 325, and he says he wants really good thin blood running through his veins. And he claims again that he's been doing it for decades, except that doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, what could he could be covering for something else. And then you have the bruising on his hands. He was bruised up all over his right hand, and he tried to explain it away as vigorous handshaking, but that never made a lot of sense. And now it has appeared, it started to appear on his left, which means I think he is getting some kind of IV treatment of some kind. And if you're getting routine IVs, well, after a while, they can no longer stick you in the same veins. And now it could be that he had been getting IVs in his arms, or they couldn't get his arm veins to work, so they would been using the top of the hand, which is another spot they like to use. Um, and when that didn't work, when if he's now blown the one on his right hand, maybe he is using the one on his left. And I think that means that his health is going, it is as bad as what we think it is. And he is very worried about his health and continuing to survive. So he is upping the speed at which they are doing things because he's trying to build his legacy. He's trying to do it all before his time runs out. And I think he's trying to put up a brave front. Donald Trump is going to be gone someday. And when Donald Trump is gone, those people around him are going to have to be held accountable. Now, there is going to probably be some kind of trial or a tribunal or something about everything going on in this administration. And when they do that, they are going to have to decide where to hold it. I don't know where they do it. I don't know if it's in Washington, D.C. I don't know if it is somewhere in the middle of the country. I don't know if it's if it, maybe they seize Mar-a-Lago and they do it at Mar-a-Lago. I don't know. I don't know where they hold these trials. They're going to be similar to the Nuremberg trials, and they may have to create a special court to hold everybody accountable. But I think that's what is exactly going to happen. And all of these people are going to be held accountable for the things they have done and said, et cetera, in defense of Donald Trump. And if his health doesn't hold out all the way to 29, especially if he's dealing with bad health, there's a good chance that he ends up uh, going ahead and not making it and being around to pardon these people. I think that's what they're all counting on, is that they're going to continue to win, they're going to continue to succeed, and that they are going to end up getting pardoned by Donald Trump. So it's going to be no big deal. And why are they this bold? In part because of Donald Trump. But I think they saw the same things we all saw. They saw the writing on the wall, and they saw what was going to happen going into 2024. And I think they were convinced they were going to lose 24. They were going to lose the House. They weren't going to capture the Senate, and that Kamala Harris was going to be president. That they were convinced that they were going to lose and they were going to have to deal with 4 more years of a Democrat, and they were already gearing up their strategy of how to do all that. And then they win. And when they won, now they feel untouchable. At least some of them do. The ones that are smart are the ones that are resigning. They're getting out of there. They're saying, I'm done with this. I can't support it anymore. I can't get reelected if I keep doing what I'm doing. And some of them aren't necessarily resigning, but they're saying, I'm not running again, etc. And they're the ones saying, yeah, we can't keep doing this. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, today is her last day in Congress. Now, we don't know what is going to ultimately come of it. There's going to be a lot of looking back as far as the things she has said and done. She has said and done a lot of dumb and stupid things, but uh, she is leaving Congress as of today. Now, it's 2 days after she hit the 5 year mark. She gets full retirement benefits. And that might be something we have to look at in the future and change. But first things first, we have to get past this administration. We have to get past not only this administration, but we have to start putting things back on the right foot and focusing on everything that is going on. Now, Donald uh, Trump attacked Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that's part of why she is resigning. She was getting the same treatment that they were giving everybody else from her side of the aisle. They were attacking her personally. They were giving her, threats of violence and everything, all because she wanted to release the names of the clients of Jeffrey Epstein. And this goes back to why I think part of everything going on with Venezuela happened because of Epstein. Because Marjorie Taylor Greene had threatened that she was going to read the names of the clients on the floor of the House of Representatives. And that would have happened today. Now, as far as from what I've seen by the time I'm recording this, I haven't seen that she has done that. If she has done that, obviously I will do a TikTok and I will be talking about it on tomorrow's podcast. But I haven't seen anything about her doing that yet. And Donald Trump was, I think, worried that she was going to spill the beans and talk about the connections between Trump and Epstein and everything else. So his way of solving that problem is by saying, you know what, they started attacking her. They pressured her. They were going to primary her, etc. So she decided to resign. She got the hell out of Dodge. And now that she's leaving, it makes an already thin majority for the House of Representatives even thinner. They only could lose like 4 votes, and it might only be 3 right now. Now, do I think Democrats can pick up her seat? Maybe not. But look at what happened in Tennessee. You know, it was supposed to be a district that went Republican by 22 points. And Afton Bain closed it to within 9. Now, I don't know what the district was for Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I don't think she won by 22 percentage points. I think hers was another one of those districts where it was less than 13. If there is a Democratic challenger to whoever runs in that primary, and they can close a 13-point gap, well, that would be, something. That would be more toward putting even more pressure. But Mike Johnson is already under a lot of pressure because of that thin majority. Now, there is going to be a vote coming up this week on a couple of resolutions where they are going to try to override presidential vetoes. One is on a water issue involving Colorado. I'm not well versed on that. And there's another one for disaster relief somewhere. I'm not familiar exactly with what these two are, but we're going to be watching those. And if they get through the House to override Donald Trump's veto, they would have to go to the Senate, and I don't even know what those look like. I don't even know how this bill passed the first time. But this would be one of the few times, if either one of these or both of them pass, that this administration did something around, or that this Congress did something around a presidential veto. And in fact, I don't know that Congress did much around Donald Trump's veto his first term. They were just so ineffective, they didn't get anything to his desk that required a veto. So we're going to be watching that coming up. Now, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I will be back again tomorrow with even more as we are discussing news and politics and current events, because there's always so much to talk about. And tomorrow being the 5-year anniversary of J6, there may be a lot more to talk about when it comes to all of that. We will have to see what happens with this administration and how they respond to the 5-year anniversary and how they talk about it, etc. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.